Good morning. The end of Hemshech Chaim Beis, and to understand its full plot, because the Rebbe Rashab did not finish the Hemshech, we're learning the source material, namely Torah Ohr, the Maimer Miketz Chanukah, Mi Kashem Elokeinu Hamagbihi Lo'sheves, with a beer in Torah Ohr, and then the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer on that. So we're at the end of that Maimer, on page 38d at the bottom. Because of yesterday's technical problems, I'm going to learn it again. I'll start from the beginning of the paragraph. It's going back to the beginning of the Maimer, where he started with the verse, Hamagbihi Lo'sheves, which is in Tehillim, and the Alter Rebbe dissects every word here. And we'll see that he's going to find in this verse the Momata L'mayla of Mitzvos, the Momayla Lamata of Torah, and also include briefly the role of the Neshama, because that's the triangle what we've been learning about. Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the Neshama is the one that obviously is the Shliach Hashem, God's ambassador, emissary to this world to affect everything. That's the Neshama comes down in the body, and it's compared to a Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, because the psila is as the divine soul comes into the body and the animal soul, the wick. The shemen is the fuel that the animal soul, that the divine soul impresses upon and trains and through his bonus, the animal soul to go along and also come away from, instead of a desiring materialism, to love God. And that in turn creates the Ohr Hashem, the Ohr and Avos Hashem, the flame, the fire that the Ner creates. Then this Neshama has tools and resources besides his bonus, its own faculties. It also is given Torah and Mitzvos. So Mitzvos is like a Ner, also like a Ner, because the mitzvah also is mislabish and gashmias. Just like the soul comes down into our body, the mitzvah comes down, like he said, that the mitzvahs are in physical matter, and all physical matter in some ways included the mitzvah, because the mitzvah's role is to elevate the animal soul and the physical world. So that's the mitzvah, is a wick that the Torah that leads, when it transforms the world, like he said, to the level of a makif, a lavush, and elevates it to where? To create Torah Ohr. And Torah Ohr is Amshacham Momayla Lamata, which is completely different dimension, where you have a real experience of the divine unity, that Hashem, as he is above, that's how he is below. And Yidishin V'Aniyachlin, as he explained. It's out of Shinui. So in the Shema, the Neshama itself begins the process. That's why you first need that to preface. The Neshama warms up and educates and trains the animal soul. The mitzvah elevates it even further to transform it from a seichel anushi to a seichel eliki, to taste the seichel of Torah, which is chakim v'lei b'chachmi yediyah, to experience the superconscious, meaning beyond the transcendent, beyond the structures, all the way higher than say the ishtalshalos. That's Torah. So there you have these three elements coming together: neshama, mitzvah, Torah. And of course, by doing so, you transform the world to be a place where the divine presence is here in a permanent way, which of course will be when the Geula comes. Doesn't mention that explicitly, but that's obviously the story. So now he's going to fit this in, say with this, he's going to explain the pasuk Hamagbihi Lo'sheves. Like we said, the actual translation of Hamagbihi is, as I said, the translation I have at least, it says, who dwells on high. So Hamagbihi Lo'sheves, who is like Hashem, who is like a heaven, who is like the Lord our God, Mi'ash Hashem Elokeinu, who dwells on high. And then he says, and he looks down upon heaven and earth. So what does this mean, the Hamagbihi Lo'sheves? So the Alter Rebbe begins first with the word Hamagbihi, and makes it clear Hamagbihi has an extra yud at the end. So it's not just Magbiya, to elevate, it elevates the Yud. And he explains what that means. We learned it yesterday. Let's learn it inside again and explain it as best as possible. And then we'll understand it better, I believe, once we learn the next mimer and the Mittler Rebbe's mimer. But we will get through this. So he says like this: V'zeu Hamagbihi Lo'sheves, bottom of 38d. Pages can be found if you want to follow the text at ayimbeis.com. So Pirush Hamagbiya Yud, Hamagbiya, and the Yud at the end. What is the Yud? The Yud represents the Yud in the Hey. A Hey has three parts, three lines. It has a right leg, has a top, a roof, and it has a left leg. So the top and the roof is like a dalet. That's a dalet. When you add the Yud, which is the left leg, it turns it into a Hey. So you say, what's the process? Dalet represents poverty, impoverished, meaning it's lacking, it's not complete, and it needs to be elevated. So he says, Shah Dalet hu b'chinas Dalet, which could mean dalus, poor. Okay, the leslei megamel klum, because it has nothing of its own, which usually referred to malchus. Nasa hey al yedei hayud. This dalet becomes a hey when you add the yud. Shebetecha, the yud within the hey, which is that left leg. V'hainu b'chinas ha-mitzvah. That's what a mitzvah does. It takes, like we said earlier about stokim meremim goy, it takes a world, a material world, that on its own is lifeless spiritually. It's physically alive. And what does it do? It elevates it. So we discussed what that means. Tzedek nasa tzedakah. My understanding, unless we'll find in the Maimon more explanation, that tzedek is a midah called tzedek, righteousness. Like you say chesed. Tzedakah is the act of actually doing tzedakah, the mitzvah of tzedakah. So obviously, if a person didn't have tzedek in their nefesh, meaning kindness, they wouldn't do tzedakah. But you can have kindness in your nefesh and be asleep and not actualize it. So the hay is the mitzvah. That's what I think he means. But bottom line is from the hay again is an additional hay. The hay is what the yud does, and the yud is, he says, b'chinas ha-mitzvah shemitzvah k'nas tzedakah v'tzedakah tereimim goy. Like he said in the previous column, at the bottom of the, close to the bottom of the page, he said, kol ha-mitzvahs nikros b'shem tzedakah. Why? Through the tzedakah and chesed that we do below, to energize, to revive, to resurrect or revive the lowly, the ruach shvalim, the spirit of the lowly, to rejuvenate them, which, and the only is chashuv kemes. Just reading back from the previous column. So kain v'yesem kain le'en. That's what a mitzvah does. Nimshach ruach chayim u'mayla, mayla b'chaya chayim l'hachis beisim mamish. Mitzvah. So what does a mitzvah do? A mitzvah brings life into the physical world, meaning spiritual life, divine life. There's a word from the Magid that says, the pasuk says, "V'chai behem." Talks about mitzvahs. It says you shall live with them. From that they learn that pekuach nefesh deicha all the mitzvahs, except the three. Why? Because the God said, "Live with my mitzvahs. Don't die by them." Lo sheyamus behem. So that's the simple interpretation. V'chai behem. Live with the mitzvahs. The Magid teaches v'chai behem. Make the mitzvahs make you come alive. You shall live with it that makes you come alive. And often the Rebbe would bring this Torah of the Magid with the story of the Baal Shem Tov, that his Talmidim saw that when he put on tzitzis, the tzitzis themselves, not because he would shake them, they themselves would tremble. Because he did a mitzvah with such chayis, personally, that it actually permeated the very physical tzitzis, that the tzitzis would shake. It's like, in a sense, activating the subatomic particles that cause the physical matter itself to vibrate. So in other words, what a mitzvah does, even if we don't always see it, it makes something come alive that was not alive before. That's what a mitzvah does. And that's why it's called tzedakah, because tzedakah you see it in the most obvious way. A person who's needy, chashav kames, he's considered like lifeless. That's what an ani is, because he doesn't have resources. And we all know also the demoralization that comes from it. And when you give someone tzedakah, you mechaya ruach shvolim. And yes, and he says, and how much more so? L'mayla, he says that so that's why tzedakah embodies the very essence of what mitzvahs are. I'm just bringing it back to explain what he's saying here. So therefore, tzedakah, a mitzvah, hayna b'chinas ha-mitzvahs, tzedakah tereimim goy ayidei shemagbiya as b'chinas hayud shebehei. How? Because it elevates the yud shebehei l'mayla be'eden say baruch hu mamish. Higher, all than eden say baruch hu. That's what a mitzvah does. So just reading this sounds like a few things. You start with a daled. That's the state of dalus, like ruach shvolim, lifeless. The yud, you add a yud to the daled, that makes it into a hey. And that's the mitzvah. He says the mitzvah knas tzedakah. But then it seems to be that there's something more. That because he says magbiya, not the daled. He says magbiya b'chinas hayud shebehei l'mayla. So it seems that in addition to it making the dalet into a hey, it also elevates the yud higher and higher. I don't think that necessarily two steps here, but he is saying those two things. That the mitzvah is the yud, but then he also says, the mitzvah tereimim goy, it elevates the goy, the nation, the world. Which is exactly the words he used earlier, what a mitzvah does. He said, same words. At the end of the next to last paragraph on the previous column, he says exactly those words. So it's very clearly associated. That's what a mitzvah does.
What's the connection for you to the mitzvah?
Well, you could teach two ways. You could either say the yud is the mitzvah because well, let me say the other way first. You could say that actually, because he says like this, so you could actually be saying that the mitzvah is more than the yud. The mitzvah elevates the yud. Anyway, he doesn't explain here why the mitzvah is yud. He just says it is. But with the Hainu B'chinas HaMitzvah, you could also teach it's not going on the yud, it's going on the elevation of the yud. But he definitely says Dalit, you add a yud al yidei yud shebetecha is the Magbihi, that's Magbia the yud, that's the inyan of a mitzvah, to be Magbia the yud.
V'hainu b'chinas ha-mitzvah. Hayud shebetoicho v'hainu b'chinas ha-mitzvah.
Yeah, but you could say v'hainu goes not on the few words, it goes on the whole teichin. Now, once you say there's a yud shebetoicho, he says v'hainu. Now that we know there's a yud that turns the dal into hey, that's the yin of a mitzvah, is hamagbihi, hamagbia the yud. Or you could say that the yud is the mitzvah, and then the mitzvah also elevates the yud. I lean toward the first way, actually, but that's all he says. What can I tell you? I would need to research it more, and I really want to look in the Maimer, the next, the Biur. I don't know if the Biur explains it. I think he does. And the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. So let's leave it. What we know is, we know what he says. He says, some things are not clear. It's very bekitzer. I think in the Biur Advarim on page 40, column 1 and 2, he speaks about it more in detail. So maybe we'll understand it better there. But let's suffice to say, these are the points he makes. Hamagbihi, Hamagbiya Yud. What is the Yud? The Yud is what turns the Dalet into a Hey, which is what a mitzvah does. And then the mitzvah elevates it higher. So you could say it's two steps, or it's one big picture here that includes both elements. Idea Yud, yeah, Magbiya. Nasa hey. And we be the Yud Shabbat, the dollar should become the dollar. Yeah, the Vahainu either goes on the words before or on the top, or on the top. That is Magbiya the Yud. Okay. So that's a Hamagbihi, which is interesting because in the verse itself, when you say Hamagbihi Lo'sheves, as I said, the English translation they have, he dwells on high. In other words, the Lo'sheves is in the state of is where in the Gavoya. He dwells on high. But I'm not sure. Rav Shlomo, how do you translate a Hamagbihi Lo'sheves? How would you translate a Poshet Hebrew? Without the Meforshim anything. What would be a Hamagbihi Lo'sheves? Ki mi kashem Elokeinu Hamagbihi Lo'sheves.
That
What would be
that he is dwelling, that he is sitting, is Magbihi.
So in other words, he's Lo'sheves is in Gavoya. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So why do you say Hamagbihi? Why doesn't it just say Hu Yeshiv Meremim, Hu Yeshiv B'Gavoyim?
Because regular, when you say the word Yeshiv, it means in Lamato. But you want to say, but Mika Shem Elokeinu, Hamagbihi Lo'sheves, that his Lo'sheves has no agbola. He is above everything.
And if you said Yeshiv B'Gavoyim, it wouldn't mean the same thing?
Look at the end of the pasuk. Hamashpili Liro is b'shamayim u'va'aretz. He's a shpola.
Yeah, so I'm saying, so he dwells on high. I'm just wondering, because the Alter Rebbe is definitely not teaching like that. He's not saying that he's Yeshiv B'Gavoyim. He's not saying that. He's saying Hamagbihi actually is a level that you're elevating the Yud upwards, the Maila. Anyway, let's see how he teaches Lo'sheves now. I'm only asking because I want to see how the Alter Rebbe is taking the pasuk and how he's explaining it. So let's read the next section.
Different.
No, for sure it's different. It's a pnimis dikapirish. The whole thing. Okay, so then he says now Lo'sheves. Anyway, let me stop. Any questions on what we've learned till here? Okay. Now he goes to the next word, Lo'sheves. What does Lo'sheves mean? So Lo'sheves literally means he dwells. So he says, Lo'sheves, after we've heard that a mitzvah elevates it, l'mayla, Lo'sheves liyes b'chinas mochen l'shiftacha. That this elevation that he's talking should be in a form mochen l'shiftacha means a mochen means like a heichel, like a car, what do we call a heichel? A hall, a place, a location, a home, if you wish. How do you translate mochen? How do you translate heichel in English? Not a hallway. You say a corridor. Heichel, not a corridor. Mochen l'shiftach anyway means like mochen is like almost like a home, a place where he can sit, where the king has a place where he resides. Dahainu. And what does that mean? So the first point is an aliyah. Magbihi is to elevate. To elevate to a very high level. Lo'sheves is the opposite, is to bring it down. That you should have the asherah. That Eirei Soy Baruch Hu should have a place where it rests, where it resides. Mamish, literally, Shubchinis Yeshiva. It's in a state of yeshiva. Yeshiva is when you sit down. You're not elevating, you're settling in. Dahainu b'chinis yirida v'hashpola etzlei kavyachol. That kavyachol, for him, it's actually a descent. So Magbihi is talking about elevation. And this, he didn't talk yet about Hamashpili, by the way. He's still talking about Lo'sheves. Hamagbihi Lo'sheves. Yirida v'hashpola etzlei kavyachol, so to speak. U'kamoshe Kosov, the next column, 39a. Vayeshev Hashem melech le'elam. So we say the Eibishter sat down, a melech le'elam, the eternal king, or king forever. So you see the concept, you see psukim that talk about God sitting down on the Kisei HaKovod, on the royal throne. So it's a state of yeshiva. So Chassidus explains, here the Alter Rebbe is saying it briefly, that yeshiva and amida, when the king stands and when the king sits, is a metaphor. One is an aliyah and one is to come down. Kav Yachal, he's coming down. So when he's sitting b'kisei rachamim or kisei din, he's sort of settling down. That's what happens when a person sits down at a table. He's not on the move. he's settling in to learn, to daven, to eat a meal. Kiliyas melech le'elam, he b'chinas yeshiva. So the Alter Rebbe now again, every pasuk the Alter Rebbe touches always has a chiddush in it. So v'yeshiv Hashem melech le'elam simply means that the melech, the God sits sits forever. So Alter Rebbe says no, melech le'elam means a melech for the world. He b'chinas yeshiva v'hashpala ki al mi yimlech. The fact that the Eibishter is ruling existence means that a superior entity like God has to come down. Like we learned earlier, that all of existence is only a reflection. The Melech on his own is completely removed from the Am. Like he says, Ami Yimlech. Who is he going to rule over? There's no one comparable to him. So you have to say if the Eibishter should rule, you have to have something in common. When you have a king who rules over his subjects, they're all human beings. There's something in common among them. Chassidus actually brings an expression that you can't be a melech al zvuvim. You can't be a king of the flies, a lord of the flies. I think that's where he got the name of the book, melech al zvuvim. Why? Because a zvuv, a fly, and a human king, you don't call it. You're not going to say, I'm a king of the flies. There's nothing in common. So the melech, so the Eibishter, how much more so is the infinite distance of God to existence. So what does it mean that God rules over the world? The answer is because he comes down in a state of Vayeshev Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe is teaching, since the Melech Le'elam is coming to the Elam, requires a Hashpala, a Yerida Kavyachol, like we learned, the divine that comes into existence. So on one hand, the mitzvah elevates, but on the other hand, the mitzvah also brings it down into the physical world, Machal Shiftacha, where God dwells.
Can I ask a question?
Let me finish the subject. Let me finish. V'zuhi halah shaydei mitzvahs mamata l'mayla. And this is the halah that comes through mitzvahs from the bottom up. Because a mitzvah we do with the physical world, like we learned, we take the physical, we use it as a mitzvah. The mitzvah elevates it l'mayla, but at the same time, it's also drawing it down. So that's Hamagbihi Lo'sheves. It elevates existence, and at the same time, it draws down, like we learned earlier, when we learned about a mitzvah, that he said that first you need the hamshacha and halah, he said. If you remember, he said the words by the makif. He said, She'ena tachten eila l'mayla ad she'redes tchila ha'aram u'mayla. And both ways, ruach, not ruach, I said ruach, sorry. Asher kedeshanu b'mitzvah that we do a mitzvah, it says it has the ability to maila, the levushim, but it's also bringing it down. So bottom line, he's teaching a mitzvah here, not mamayla lamato, because it's not Torah is mamayla lamato. A mitzvah is taking this world, but it elevates the world, and in the process, it's Hamagbihi Lo'sheves that God dwells in existence. That's how we do it through mitzvahs. That's what mitzvahs do. They create a dwelling place. That whether it's tzitzis, whether it's talis, tefillin, a lulav, matzah, whatever the mitzvah is, the mitzvah is creating a mochin, a home for God in this world. And that's mamata l'mayla, but it elevates it to a very high level. And that's a Hamagbihi Lo'sheves. So it's an elevation, but Lo'sheves in a way that is permeating existence down below. That's mitzvah. That is mitzvahs. So that's a Hamagbihi Lo'sheves, how the Alter Rebbe teaches. So the simple teach, who is like Hashem, who dwells on high, that's the simple interpretation. Here we say Hamagbihi Lo'sheves means that it's elevating the Yud all the way up to the mitzvah, Lo'sheves, to cause God to dwell in this existence here, in our world. That's mitzvah. Okay.
And this is not the hisbonenus. He will say later that this is not.
No, this is not the hisbonenus. This is the mitzvah. The hisbonenus is going to say at the end of the Maimer is another level. This is not ner Hashem nishma sodom. This is ner mitzvah. Remember, the mitzvah is a psila. A psila creates a place for God to dwell, for the oir of Torah to dwell in this world. Remember, he said all the mitzvahs, Torah is nechaz al yidei mitzvahs, because Torah itself is just elikos. Torah is nechaz, is grasped and channeled through the mitzvah. That's the wick to turn a physical existence into a divine light, into Torah. That's what we learned earlier. So that's what a mitzvah is, Hamagbihi Lo'sheves. That's the inyan of Hamagbihi Lo'sheves. Okay. Let me take any questions if anybody wants to ask it.
He said, Kol ha-Torah ikoron v'yesodoson hi b'mitzvos. Now we understand it.
Yeah. And earlier he said even more. He said, what did he say? He said, exactly. So nechaz is mischaber because the mitzvah brings the Torah into a physical reality. If you only had Torah, like for example, mitzvahs could only be done in this world. You can learn Torah in Gan Eden. You can't do mitzvahs in Gan Eden. As Chassidus brings. Okay. You wanted to ask something?
Well, I think you pretty much said it, honestly, or the Rebbe Alter Rebbe said it. But what I was going to say is this inyan of why is the yud added to Hamagbihi Lo'sheves, and it's almost like a poetic form. I mean, but the poetic form stands for something, which he explained, meaning who is like God, who is when he's raised up by our performance of mitzvahs. When we're Makadosh, the Eibishter, by doing his mitzvahs, we take a concept that's in our head and we do a mitzvah, we act on it, we take it into action, and we raise up God essentially. We elevate his importance, but in that process, we also bring him into this world. So, what other being can you say when you elevate him, when you exalt him? At the same time that you exalt him, you're actually bringing him down lower into.
That works. That's good.
Yeah.
That would be the Mikash. The Alter Rebbe doesn't spell out the Mikash Shem Elokeinu, but the way you're saying it works. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
The mitzvah is not only to bring us up. The purpose of the mitzvah is Onoichi, we should get up in order, it should be Lo'sheves, it should come down the Onoichi.
That's right. It doesn't just say Hamagbihi, it says Hamagbihi Lo'sheves, exactly.
That's interesting. You could say the Aliyah Bishvil al Yerida. I mean, oftentimes we say the Yerida Bishvil al Aliyah. I don't know which is more common, but this is the Aliyah Bishvil al Yerida. Yeah?
Yeah, you could do it with mitzvah. Without the mitzvah, you cannot do it.
Because I don't know if I'd call it Aliyah B'Shvil Yerida. I don't know if I'd say that. I think it's a combination. The way you first said it is the right way to say it. Who's like God? Because remember, the kavana of Hashem in the highest level is to have a dir b'tachtenim. Usually that's counterintuitive. The higher you go, you think you continue climbing. And here it's like the higher you go, the more it wants you to go down.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I meant. I was trying to be even more bekitzer with my Yerida Aliyah Bishvil Yerida, but anyways, that obviously I meant what I said the first time is more complete, comprehensive explanation of this. It's beautiful, by the way. I mean, the way he pulls this off is. I mean, if you think about it,
when you read in the pasuk, if you read it in Tehillim, so there he says, "Ramal kol goyim Hashem al Shemayim kvedei." There he's talking more exalting God, but the Alter Rebbe gives it a whole rich narrative here. It's not just exalting God, that God is Magbihi, like we said before, that he resides in the high, on high. The Lo'sheves takes on a whole different meaning, because who cares where God resides? Why is it important to emphasize where he resides? You know, But yeah,
okay, but it's just super beautiful. But it's also a nice, what shall I say? Like almost mnemonic. Like honestly, when I first got the Hanukkah mimer, I didn't understand the immediate connection between the pasuk and what he's giving over it. Of course, now I do. We're in the heart of it. But now, once you understand it, when you just look at that word Hamagbihi and it's Hamagbihi, you have the whole mimer in that one transformation of that letter. Or at least this aspect of the mimer.
Listen, now you can appreciate a little when Chassidim, first time they met the Alter Rebbe people, how blown away they were, because it wasn't just a Talmid Chacham with a nice vart or pshat. He transforms psukim into a whole life operator's manual, you know.
It's unbelievable.
But that's the Alter Rebbe. This is classic Alter Rebbe. You know, it's like, because I would like to research and see if anybody says anything like this on this pasuk. Maybe in Kabbalah somewhere there may be some reference, but I wouldn't be surprised. It's completely Alter Rebbe's interpretation. And most importantly, how he has it all in mind when he starts the Maimer and he goes into Ner Mitzvah and Torah Ohr and Ner Hashem. You have no idea that it's coming back to this, because there's no way you could understand it if you didn't understand all the Ner aspects, because that's where it really comes alive in that sense. So you'll see how this Maimer is going to be developed in the beer, and even more so in the Mittler Rebbe. It's fascinating, really. I mean, one of the reasons I'm doing it is besides to help us understand Ayin Beis, to see the Hishtalshlus, the evolution, how a Maimer from the Alter Rebbe begins, very condensed, and then how it's unpacked, and how it becomes like this whole sugya. In Ayin Beis, it becomes like a whole thing, Mamayla Matal, Mamatal Mamayla, Yichud, which we're learning now at the end of Ayin Beis. It's amazing. It's beyond just the chassidus of it. You just see, it's like going into the engine room, like going into like the plant where they manufacture things, and you see how it's being manufactured.
Yeah, it's well said. It's just beautiful. What
There is
unbelievably
about this psukim. There is another angle that is brought in Chassidus, and I think the Tzemach Tzedek is saying that this is the difference between the way that Goyim are looking at Hashem and we. Goyim are seeing Rom al kol Goyim Hashem, that Hashem is above everything. Al Shomayim kvoidehi b'Shomayim. But Yidden are saying that Hamagbihi.
Rom al kol Goyim Hashem. Yeah, exactly right.
But Yidden are saying Hamashpili Lirois, when the Eibishter is lowering himself.
One second, we didn't get to that. That's the next part. That's the next section.
That is
I will tell you that. Yeah, the Rebbe once wrote to they had a conference on Jewish mysticism in London, in England. The Rebbe wrote a letter. I use it a lot. It's a fascinating letter. He writes that the key difference, or one of the key differences between Jewish mysticism and other schools of mysticism, is that in Jewish mysticism, you could achieve more through an action on earth than through a meditation. Yeah,
it's beautiful, very counterintuitive, beautiful.
Yeah, because usually you think mysticism, you leave Earth, you're going up into a more spiritual, ascetic, monastic lifestyle. That's what he says. Yeah, no, there's no question about it. I use it very much. A lot of what I write is because usually you think of there's Gashmias, physical, then there's Ruchnias. Body, soul. And that's where you stop. The soul connects you to God. When you look at this, you come to learn, no. There's body, there's soul, there's Gashmi, Ruchni. Then there's the Eibishter who is not Gashmi and not Ruchni. Atzmus. And he, actually, both of them are equal. Like we learned about Ohr and Keli, Cheshach and Ohr, Tzimtzum and Gilui. And that's something that you don't find. Usually people say, okay, I'm no longer materialistic, I became more spiritual. But spirituality is also part of the journey to come to a place that's neither material nor spiritual. And that's why Dira B'Tachtenim bring down the spirit into the material. That's counterintuitive, as you said.
So this is the Eibishter is Hamagbihi Lo'sheves, that Shema Hamashpili Lirois b'Shomayim u'v'Oretz. That Shomayim is for him also Hamashpili Lirois. That is equal to Oretz. This is your word. The Alter Rebbe is going to touch Mashpili Liris in a minute, in his way. So you're now a little jumping ahead. He didn't get to Mashpili Liris yet. That's the next section now. 1 second. I said in a
when we learn
different angle.
Listen. Let's learn it. Let's learn it in order that the Alter Rebbe is teaching it, and then we'll discuss it. 1 second. Wanted to add one more thing. If you remember the Torah Shalom that we learned, begins mitzvahs misyachsis ala atzmus. Remember, he said the whole thing is to understand that mitzvahs are connected to atzmus. That atzmus and the yichud, the mitzvah of yichud is an atzmus. So there also you see the connection somewhat. That's mitzvahs that actually do this chibur of atzmus and existence. Okay, I just wanted to say one more thing. The pasuk after Mashpili Liris, interestingly, is Mekimim Me'ofer Dol. Ma'ashbis Yorim Evyon. He raises the poor from the dust. So even though the Alter Rebbe didn't cite it, but you see the psukim here also, you can expand the whole kapitel here, Kuf Yud Gimel, based on Alter Rebbe's explanation, the verse afterwards also now continues like Shivim Nedivim im Nedivim. In other words, Shivi Akeres Bais. You find this whole theme is really in all the verses here about elevating from the below and bring it into existence. Yeah, just pointing that out. The Kimim of Fadol, right? He raises the poor. Hakoma. So it's everything. It's Aliyah. Okay, let's learn now the next piece. That's mitzvah. V'zui alosh adei mitzvah mata l'mayla. Avla teira oir. Teira is teira oir. Who he amshachem l'mayla l'mata. As he said at the bottom of 38c. Like we said earlier, because our teira is coming, the oir as it is above is coming down below. Hashtalshlus is a helem and a slapshus level by level. Yoshas cheshach sisrei. But teira is megala mukes. Minecheshach. Mamakim. And that's to bring down Erein Sof as it is above. Ani rishin, ani achlim mibolad, mibilodai, ein elikim. So teira is amshach mamayla mata, different than mitzvah. Yes, the teira manifests through mitzvahs, but the teira is mamayla mata, not mamata lamayla. And that's the second part of the verse, the second verse. Hamashpili lires b'shamayim. Teira shebiksav, u'ba'oretz teira shebal peh. And that's the mashpili. Mashpili means he descends. He looks down. He comes down. Hashpola. Now, before when he said Hashpola vayeshev, he's talking about the yeshiva mitzvahs, but it's aveda mamata l'mayla that elevates the world and manifests God on existence. Here we're talking about God on His terms, not on the world. A mitzvah is working with the world and elevating the world, and in the process it becomes a machal l'shiftacha, a home for God, God's home. But here we're talking about that the Torah, which is completely above, is coming down, mamay lamata, and Alter Rebbe teaches b'shamayim ba'aretz, not just to look at heaven and earth as he's gazing on it. B'shamayim means Torah shebiksav, and ba'aretz is Torah shebal peh. Remember before when he spoke about the Tau Kada, a Tamoli Kada rather, he spoke about Sifrin Darai. He said Torah shebiksav and Torah shebal peh. Ikram v'seidosanu b'mitzvah. So he mentioned Torah shebiksav and Torah shebal peh already there. Okay. So it's very short, one line. Did not explain it because he's relying that he already explained that Torah is mamay lamat. All he's doing here is connecting it to the pasuk. But I will tell you later in the next mimer and the Mittler Rebbe's mimer, the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe do explain it more. But here he suffices just by telling us this level. So you have mamat lamayla, mamay lamat. Now we still have to deal with the neshama, ner Hashem nishmasadim, where that works in. So now the Alter Rebbe is going to be medayik in the word lires, riyah. That by Torah it says, v'sham hu lires. Lires b'shamayim. What's the lires? So it says the level of riyah. B'chinas riyah v'izgalus erein sof baruch hu. Riyah is the ultimate. Remember in Ayin Beis, how much was about riyah? Again, you see a connection to Ayin Beis. The riyah that we should see the divine. So in Zman Hazeh, we have to see we need the support of Torah and Malachim and the Einei Ha'eda. As we learned, you need a light because you can't see in the dark. But the eye itself sees. And the eye itself will see. So Torah is an inyan of riyah. It gives us a picture, a visual picture of what God wants. That's the Torah. Torah is a blueprint. It's revealing to us. It's like a guiding light. We say Torah Ohr. What is Torah Ohr? The Rebbe would very often speak about it and say that we live in a dark world and you need a light to shine because the roads are all dark. If you don't have headlights or a lighthouse or something that will illuminate the ways, we don't know how to be. So it's true, Torah does it through mitzvahs. It tells us what mitzvahs to do. But Torah is the blueprint. Torah is the guiding light. The Rebbe said, Hayra b'chaim. Torah is b'layich. It illuminates the paths, what is right, what is wrong. Without that, we would be in the dark. So it's a form of riyah, And Riyah is also Mamayla Lamata, because Riyah means you're seeing, you're not just hearing it. You're seeing it. Liris, Riyah is Galus Erein Soy Baruch Hu Lamata Kamay Lamayla. So he's clearly referring to what he said, that below, Torah gives us a picture of God as he is on his terms, that we should see what is God like down below. So I'll explain in a few more extra words here. Say Anoichi, in the beginning of the Ten Commandments, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. Anoichi, the Gemara says, is an acronym, Nutrikun, or an acronym, Rosh Tevis, Ano Nafshi Ksovis Yehovas. I, God says, I, Ano, Nafshi, have Ksovis Yehovas, I've instilled, I've imbued, I've engraved myself in these words. So, Eisi Atam Leichim. Without Torah, we could Momata Lamaila try to figure out what God is like. That's what the others did. They did the best they could do that a human being could do, and they reached what Chassidus calls Sheresh HaNivroim. In volume 1, he spoke about it at length. Matan Torah, something new happened. God came. Ato Haresa Ladas. Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. This is a revelation. God is saying, now that you've made your effort and you've tried your best to reach me, I will now reveal myself to you. Ata, the Alter Rebbe teaches, Ata du atzmus, hatzach bavizin, amizol der wissen. God revealed himself, like we learned in Torah Shalom. There's mamata l'mayla the yichud, that's how much we can reach as we climb up. But then atzmus, on his initiative, is giving us a picture of himself. I mentioned a CAT scan. So when you look at Torah, you're getting an X-ray of God, so to speak. Obviously, no one can see God entirely, so it's obviously in some form, the Torah speaks in our language. But what is the Torah? It's essentially, God is saying, it's not my creation, it's not my piece of art, it's my thinking of why I created this piece of art. What lies behind it? What's the wisdom, the will, my purpose in it all? So the Eibishter is revealing. Eibishter could have just created, like an artist, a piece of art, and you go figure out from the art what the artist is like. But imagine the artist makes an appearance and comes to you and says, listen, I see you've been studying my art. Let me tell you who I am. That's Torah. I will tell you who I am. And indeed, it's the Torah that actually dictates existence. God looks into the Torah, his blueprint, which is a reflection of his plan, and with that he creates existence. And now he gives us the Torah, says, here's the blueprint. I'm giving you my own blueprint that I created, that I wrote for myself. Shashrim lefonav, I'm giving it to you in a language that you can understand and appreciate. So Torah is essentially a mamay lamata thing. Now I'm elaborating also because in Ayin Beis, that was what started the theme after the 550 pages of speaking mamata lamayla, primarily tefillah, prayer. He goes and starts, and now let's talk about Torah. And if you remember some of the points I said that Rabbi Rashab never finished, the list was made. I think Yitzchak listed it all in writing. So I pointed out 2 places that he says that Torah, not like Mamat Lama, not like Kalim, that the Kalim give us a picture of the Ohr. The Ohr is giving us a picture into the Kalim. That's Torah. Those words. I'll even point out exactly where he said them, because that's so critical here in this context. He said these words on page 1348. He said, that what? That it means you're not going from the keli, from the art to the artist, you're going from the artist to the art. And similarly, earlier on 1286, I believe, yeah, he also said the same thing, which he never got to. But when I read the Torah and then the explanations, you say, 1 second, that's exactly what the Alter Rebbe is talking about here. How Torah gives us a picture from above, Mamai Lamata. So there he says the language is, just to read the exact language. I'm looking at Ayin Beis right now. 1246, he says, so in other words, it's not based on the human terms from the bottom up. It's based on coming from the picture from above. And it has a great mila, but we also need mamata l'maila because we need it integrated. So you see here slowly emerging the image, the picture of Ayin Beis. So even though Ayin Beis never gets back to this, to their mitzvah Torah Ohr, it stops by the yichud, where to explain the idea of how a nefesh habamis can appreciate ava. It was the first half of this mimer, or the first, basically the first 2 paragraphs. Now you see the end of the mimer, which clearly would have been the basis of Ayin Beis, because Ayin Beis talks about it beferish. So now you see how it really all weaves together. So that is Torah. Lamata kamay lamayla. Okay, so now we have Mamata lamayla mitzvahs, Mamayla lamata Torah. Tefillah he does not talk about here, even though earlier he talked about Shema, and we're going to talk about that now. Maybe that's hinted to the Tefillah part, but I don't want to yet connect it to Ayin Beis Tefillah, because I want to still see how he develops the relationship between mitzvah, Torah, Tefillah. As I said, I think at the end, Tefillah is mamish mamat lamayla, mitzvahs is a combination, and Torah is mamish mamayla lamata in general terms. But I don't want to jump the gun yet. We'll get there. So now comes the end of this mimer. So this is lires shemayim va'aretz. So it's in of ria mamayla lamata and lamata kamay lamayla ria. V'loy b'chin Shema Yisrael. So now he's going back. Remember the neshama on its own, when he said neshama she is bonus nefesh alikis atzma, that's without Torah mitzvahs. The neshama itself could be mizbein neshma. The truth is Shema is from Torah, but the point here is the emphasis is the neshama is contemplating on it, and so there it says Shema Yisrael. Shema is not riyah. Shema is listen. Shmiya. The hainu his bonus nefesh alikis. This is talking about the nefesh alikis through its own effort, trying to understand Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Shehi b'chinas shmiya belvad. So you see that Torah has a great advantage, because Torah is giving you riyas, giving you a snapshot, a picture, literally a visual of godliness. Shema is when you listen to something, you're hearing the story. You don't see it with your own eyes. Generally, that's mamata lamai. Like if I see something, so it captures me entirely. But if I tell you what I saw, that's a mamata. You slowly, piece by piece, I tell you the story, and you piece it together, and you come away with a picture. But it's not ever a picture. It's always a lower level. It's more of a hisbonenus. So it's a high level because it's integrated in the nefesh alikis. And remember that prefaces ner mitzvah Torah as we learned. But still, it's a level of shmiyah, bolvad.
I think this is ner Hashem.
But one second. But Torah is riyah. Elo, however, Torah is kamesha kosev ki ayin ba'ayin yiru. Torah is like ba'ayin yiru, eye to eye. You will see eye to eye. Like he brings in Tanya, chapter 36. He brings other psukim. V'nigla kved Hashem v'ro kol basa yachdav. He brings the pasuk v'lo yikonef ed merecha v'hoya necha reisas merecha. That you'll actually see the master. Ayin ba'ayin. Ayin is not shmiyah. Shmiyah is ba'ezim. You hear with your ears. So maybe more internal, because when you hear something, you understand it. When you see it, you don't maybe understand it. But on the other hand, riyah is much more the etzem itself. You're seeing the thing itself. So here now, he finally finishes with this mimer by showing us ner mitzvah is the first step is Hamagbihi Lo'sheves, which is mamata l'mayla, he said. Then comes mamayla lamata, Torah, Hamashpili lires, in a form of riyah, lamata kamay lamayla, and Shema is not necessarily referred to in this kapitel Tehillim, at least not ostensibly, but Shema is a contrast to lires, the lires of Torah riyah. So Shema is this bonus. So it starts with the neshama being mizbeinin in Shema Yisrael about the divine unity. That in turn affects the animal soul, recognizing that existence is all nullified, and including the animal soul. So it creates that the animal soul should also have a haftas Hashem Elokecha. That in turn will lead to v'hoya dvarim ha'ela asher anechi mitzavcha, mitzvahs, ner mitzvah, elevating and transforming the animal soul, the material world, to seichel eliki, seichel ha'teira, which leads to Torah Ohr, the amshachim amay lamata of Torah Ohr, that gives us a picture, that gives us a clarity of the divine. As it is above, that's how it is below. And that's the full picture. So you have all three elements here, and Hamagbihi Lo'sheves and Mashpili are the two things that I called mitzvah and Torah. This is in this mimer. As I said, there's much more. The Alter Rebbe talks about this more in the next mimer. So there's more development to be said. But we finished the mimer. Okay, let me stop for any questions now.
According to these things, you explained it well. Would it be correct to say that Shema is the Ner Hashem Nishmas Odom, and then is V'hoya Advorim Ha'ele Asher Onoichi Metzav Chodos in Ner Mitzvah, and then it's coming Torah Ohr.
Didn't I just say that? I just said that. That's
just
exactly what he says.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Now,
he said that also. There's not my. I mean, the Alter Rebbe said it in the previous column, in the previous page.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly correct.
Is Torah
He said
Ohr-
these words. He said these words. He said, "Tzarich lahagdim is bonus on nefesh al kisya ner Hashem nishmas adam, k'dei liyaz v'ahavta b'chol avavcha, aiser ruach, and then he said, ad tiyeh chochma shebenefesh achrim v'chin Hashem and anim shachach lapsila shal mitzvah liskalel mamish be'era teira." Mamish said these words earlier. Yeah.
Right. So is the Ner Mitzvah brings a human being to a lower level what the Torah is bringing? I know that you
I
cannot
don't know
get
what
it.
you mean by lower level. What do you mean by lower level? You mean
That-
more gashmias?
Lamato kemoi lamailo. Is mitzvah make
No, that's Torah. Lamata kamei lamaila is Torah. Mitzvahs is mamata lamaila. Mitzvahs make it part of gashmis. Torah is not a gashmis thing. Torah is oir. A mitzvah is a psila, is a wick. So
Okay,
Torah
but-
is a pure alakus. A
the
mitzvah is bislapshus, as he said in gashmis ha'elam. So Torah, so mitzvah integrates it into existence. Torah is much higher level of yichud of lamayla kamay lamata. That's what he said very clearly.
Okay, so the mitzvah is making that the gashmias should be leha'aloisa or lekashro mit ein sof. The gilui for mitzvah, I'm asking, is it less than the gilui from Torah Ohr?
I don't know what you mean by less. Less you mean in kamus and echus and giluyim and etzem. The word less doesn't really work. Because we're not talking physical. What do you mean by less? Torah Ohr is stronger than a ner. So if you're talking about pure firepower, Torah is Torah Ohr. Ner mitzvah is only a candle. If you're talking about in echus that it permeates gashmis elam, and that's why Torah is nechaz and ikravi is sedose is mitzvahs. So mitzvahs bring it into it's very balbatish actually. The Torah without mitzvahs is God's mind, is God's rotzen. Mitzvahs is the instruments that we implement that rotzen.
But he also said that before the mitzvahs, you have to makdim zayin the hisbonenus within the Shema, right?
For the third time, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. When the Rebbe says here that Liros b'Shemaim, the Shemaim is Torah Shabbat and Aretz is Torah Shabbat Peh.
Right.
We learned earlier that Talmud was Olam Bria, Mishnah was Yetzirah, and Mikra, which is Torah Shabbat B'Ksav, is Asiya. So you would think that Torah Shabbat B'Ksav would be Haaretz, and Torah Shabbat Peh would be
You would think,
Shemaim.
but however, if you go to Ayin Beis, he discussed that there's two ways we talk about it. In Atzilus, Mikra is Chabad, and Mishnah is Chagas, and Talmud is Nihi. So he asked that question, very question. So why do we say Mikra is Asiya, Mishnah is Yetzirah, and Talmud is in Bria? So I can refer you to the page, and there's a whole discussion in Ayin Beis, just this topic itself that you just touched upon. Yeah,
I remember.
If you go to
Well,
page...
the other thing to think about is the
Just
source
a second,
of
one
the
second.
Torah.
Let me just
Sorry.
give you the
Okay.
page. Let me
Page
give you
one.
the page. Yeah, you go to page 1364 and on. He discusses this at length, the different ways to understand Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud, or Tesha B'Ksav, Tesha B'Peh.
I wonder if a simple tight chair is that when you say Torah Shabbat B'Shemaim, it's because it's it's a revelation from above. It's God's revelation of his hara, his ratzon,
Okay,
his
so
instruction.
that's why
right.
why Eliezer is asking. So why does it say Mikra is an Asiya? Then Mikra should be an Atzilus. That's
no, he
his
says
question.
here. Yeah, he's saying Mikra here.
So no, but Eliezer is asking. So then why do we find elsewhere it says that Mikra is an Asiya? Then Mikra should have been Atzilus or Bria. That's his question.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that question is asked in Ayin Beis. I just gave you the page, 1364 and on. He discusses. He basically says it's rooted higher, Mikra, meaning, and then it comes down lower into Asiya because Mikra comes into the physical world. So he discusses it there. That's the question. I understood your question. It's a good question, but the Ayin Beis talks about it.
I combine it.
Thank you. I remember the discussion. I just don't remember. I was always confused by that. I never
You look at 1365. He asks it explicitly and he answers it. It's a whole subject matter.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? So fine. So we stop here. Top of 39a. We're going to continue the next class. We'll continue the beard on this. And you'll see as we continue to develop these ideas, you'll see how it ties into Ayin Beis. I just pointed out a few things. Still needs more explanation, but it continues to get clearer and clearer as we go. And again, it would be fascinating to know how the Rebbe Rashab what he would have exactly written, what he would not have written, had he continued writing the Hemshech. But this is clearly the basis of it. And I think, as I said, then we go back to, it's essentially, if you want to put it this way, if you follow Torah Ohr, the Ayin Beis ends developing the first paragraph on page 38c. And that's without the Rebbe Rashab stopped, by Yichud, by the Nefesh, even that not, because he didn't even talk about how the Nefesh Elokis affects the Nefesh Habamis. So I would say not the end of the paragraph, the middle of the paragraph. But learning this, the continuation, and as I said, the explanation of the Mittler Rebbe, it will all become clearer and clearer. Okay, we'll stop.